The stage is yours, Jo. Thank you.
Excellent. Hey, everybody, and welcome. So today we are going to be continuing on from our lessons from last week, which means we are going to be learning some CSS. So let's get my screen shared. Is there anybody who's attending today who has not done the previous two classes? Okay, cool. So if you want to, you can get a copy of the code that we've done so far by forking my GitHub repository, or you can just view the code and copy and paste it yourself. So this is the work that we've done so far. Basically, it is this index.html file. Let me just the direct URL. There you go. So if you do want to join in with us, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be styling up this HTML today. So if you want to, you can take that whole file and save it locally on your computer. But what we've got here, in fact, I'm just going to, you can also watch the previous sessions. Thank you, Patty. I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to share my entire window so I can swap between the two. Where are we? There we are. So this is the HTML file that we were working on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in fact, let's go through it very briefly today. So let's have a brief look at what we did on last week. Just zoom in a bit. So we had a look at how our HTML needs a doc type to describe what standards we're writing to. We talked about how our HTML is broken up into head and body. And then we built out a beautiful web page with some headings. It's got a header and a main and a footer with a bunch of sections and some articles. And if I open it up in the browser, we can see that it looks like this. So this is what our beautiful website looks like at the moment. And as we go through this session today, we are going to introduce a lot of new concepts. And as I always say, don't be concerned if these things don't stick immediately. Rather than try and learn the whole of CSS off by heart, what I'm hoping that these lessons do is that they give you an introduction to the look and feel of CSS. They start you off on your journey so that you can then take this away and look up the things that you want to use in future. There's no way that you're ever going to learn every single CSS property, so don't try to. What we are going to do to start off with is we're going to open up our project that we've been working on so far in Visual Studio Code. So I will just stop sharing and start sharing my editor very briefly. So you should have a project that looks something like this, although your Visual Studio Code may look different to mine. And what I've done is I have just, I've installed Live Server and I'm currently serving it with Live Server. So that's how I'm seeing it in the browser. And if we go back into the browser again, sorry, there's going to be the usual amount of switching happening here. If I go back into the browser and I have a look at my website, so I've been joking so far that it's not a particularly attractive piece of work at the moment. We've written our semantic markup and we're happy about that, but it's not looking great. But it's not completely unstyled, is it? So if we take a look at it, you'll see that, for example, this text here is in bold and it's a larger size font than this text here. And this text here, which we know is an H2, so this is our H1, this is our H2. Our H2 is a smaller font than our H1. And our links are blue and they have a nice underline. So we're not entirely free of styles here. We can actually see that there are some styles being applied. And if we right click anywhere in the page and choose inspect, this will bring up our Chrome inspect tools here. And we can see the markup of the page that we've written. So we can see our header in there. We can see our H1. We can see the little span that we made. We can see our main with each of the sections in it. We can see the footer then. And this is a really useful tool that you're going to be using a lot in your developer careers. And the nice thing about this tool here is we can actually edit and change things live in the browser. So instead of saying hello, I could change this to say welcome. And that'll update in the window. And this is a brilliant way of testing out changes in your website to see what will look good, what fits in the space. But as soon as we refresh the page, all of those changes will be lost. As I mentioned, we do actually have some styles applying here. So if I click on, for example, the body here, should I zoom in a bit actually? I wonder if you can see that. There we go. Okay. If I click on the body tag here, you might notice, see on the left-hand side, the body itself is highlighted in blue, and then there's this orange gap around the outside. And then if I click on the header here, we can see the header is now highlighted in blue. And if I click on the main is now highlighted in blue. And if I expand the header and click on the H1 is highlighted in blue and it has this orange outline around it. And we can actually see the styles that are being applied to our HTML. So if we have a look down here, we can see that it is telling us that the H1 has, for example, a font size of 2 EM, and it has a margin start of 0.67 EM and a margin end of 0.67 EM. And a font weight of bold. So all of these styles are being applied here to make this bold, to make it, so 2 EM means twice the size of 1 EM, which is the size of the paragraph text, and it's been set in bold. And these are being applied directly by the browser. So this user agent style sheet, the user agent in this case is the browser itself, and the style sheet is some styles that it has applied in order to give some default styling to the HTML that we've written. And this is partially why semantic HTML is so important, because just by writing HTML, what we've ended up here kind of looks like a very basic Word document. The browser is making guesses as to how we might want to apply those styles, which, like, okay, thank you, that's kind of useful, but we're going to be now excellent web developers, so we don't actually need these user agent styles. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually overwrite them. So there's a few different ways that you can overwrite them. And the one that I'm going to get us to do today is to use something called a reset CSS. And what that is going to do is overwrite all of these user agent style sheets and just basically set them all to 0. You may not choose to do this in future projects, but I think it's an interesting learning tool. So we're going to do it today. So what you're all going to do is you are going to go to reset.css. In fact, just search for reset CSS, and Eric Mayer is the person who has written this tool for us. So if you open up reset CSS, you will see here in this brown box, this is the CSS that we are going to need. So what you're going to do is you're going to copy all of that. And you are going to jump over into your Visual Studio Code, and you're going to make a new file and paste that in. So you want to go to this URL and copy everything that is in the brown box. And then let's jump over to our editor. And in the editor, you are going to make a new file. You're going to call it reset.css. And save that in the same place that you saved your HTML. And you're just going to paste all of that in there. So everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat once you have got your reset CSS saved. Nice. And let's just take a look at what is actually happening in this, because whenever we're using somebody else's code, it's important that we understand what it's doing. So this is a nice introduction to what CSS looks like. So you might recognize some of these elements here. So we've got HTML, body, div, span, H1, H2, anchor. What else have we got here we might recognize? Paragraph, block quote. What these are is these are called selectors, and these are called element selectors. We are selecting the elements that are written in the HTML. And what we're saying here is this is a list of basically every element that you're likely to use while you're writing HTML. And then we're setting some styles to it. So we're saying set the margin to 0, set the padding to 0, set the border to 0, set the font size to 100%. The font family is going to just inherit from whatever the default browser font is. And we can basically ignore these. So what we're doing here is we are resetting those styles that we saw in the user agent. So no longer will the H2 be larger than the paragraph. No longer will the H1 be larger than the H2. No longer will things have a margin on them or a padding. Everything is going to be, if you thought it looked bad before, it's going to look very unstyled now. So you're going to save that and you are going to refresh in your browser. So did you see any changes in the browser? Has anyone seen any changes to what their thing looks like? No. No, we haven't seen any changes yet because all we've done right now is we've saved a CSS file. We haven't told the HTML file anything about where that CSS goes. Aha, Karen's ahead of us. Doesn't have to be linked. Exactly, Rachel. So let's jump into our HTML file. And in our head, we are going to link to our CSS file. And the HTML for that is going to look like this. So we are going to say link, and then it needs a rel attribute, REL, and that means relationship. So you're saying, what is the relationship of this file that you're linking? And our relationship is it's a style sheet. And then we need to point to the actual file itself. So where is that file living? So href is going to be reset.css. So now that we have linked the file, and we save. Now, if you refresh in your browser, now you will see what an ugly website looks like. Now we've got no styles at all. So if I briefly, in fact, I'm going to leave this up here just for a little while for people who are still typing. But yeah, give me a thumbs up if now everything is the same size. You've got no gaps between anything. The whole thing's touching the outside of the page. Yeah, cool. My web page does not display. Are you able to? Is Pradeep able to do us a screen share, Paddy, so we can take a look? Yeah, we'd need to set you up to be allowed to do that. Patty or Faye? Okay, cool. So for everyone else, I'm just going to jump back into my beautiful website. So this is what you should be seeing now. Everything is the same font size. Everything is now touching the edge. There's no gaps between anything. And it really is very plain indeed. So now what we need to do is we need to actually start writing some CSS on our own, which is going to overwrite these very blank styles and actually add some styles of our own. So if we jump back into our editor, oh, cool. Okay. Pradeep, do you want to try doing us a screen share and we can do some live debugging together? Because this is actually a brilliant way of teaching. Awesome. Okay. Can we take a look at your editor? Okay, lovely. That all looks good. And you're using the live preview.
Yes, I installed it, but it doesn't work. I don't know.
I don't know the live preview extension. I use live server. That's the one, that top one. I mean, they probably work very similarly, but let's have a look. Cool. And then jump back to your HTML. Somebody spotted you've got an extra quote in your style sheet. So if you click on the HTML tab, I meant HTML in the editor, sorry.
Oh.
Yep. But I mean, that shouldn't stop it from rendering. I think we've got two different problems here, but okay, cool. So now if you see down the bottom right-hand side, there's a little button that says Go Live.
Yeah, I
If you
forgot
click
this.
on that. So you need to open the folder. Okay, so see on the top left, there's a thing that looks like two files on top of each other, an icon. Top left. in fact, yeah, that's it. Open folder. Yes, you trust the authors. You are the authors. Okay, cool. So now if you click on the HTML file on the left-hand side, there's your HTML. And now if you click on go live on the bottom.
Yes, I'll tell you what I did. Last two sessions attended from work. Now I'm attending from home. So I cloned the entire repository. Uh, that's why
And then you didn't have
I
it
forgot to
open.
do go live on the live server here. Sorry, it's my fault.
Don't apologize. No, it's absolutely fine. Happy to help. So have you got it open in the browser now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Woohoo. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen.
Yes, just a moment.
Coolio. Anybody else, if you are having issues, please do say. I would much rather we jump in and help you out and you're able to continue along than you continue struggling. So we are going to now make a new file and we're going to call it style.css. And we're going to start writing our own styles. So we've sort of seen the shape of CSS already. We have a selector, then we have little curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, we are going to use properties to apply our styles. And the first selector that we're going to choose to apply styles to, usually we want the order of the styles that we're applying in our CSS to be similar as much as possible in order to the elements that appear in the HTML. And the first element that we've got in our HTML, in fact, if I do this, is that too small for everyone to read or is that okay? Rachel, that's a really good question. It's a partially I'm using the Reset CSS as a teaching tool to show quite how many styles are applied by the browser. And I probably wouldn't choose to use it in an actual project. But it can be frustrating, especially if you're making a design that isn't a design that's more out there and you don't want things like, you know, H1 to have a different font size and a different bolding and all the rest of it. If you really want to start with a blank slate, that's when a reset is useful. We're just using it here mostly as a teaching tool. But it's kind of interesting to see. And there are a whole bunch of other options out there as well. There's, is it Modernizer? I think maybe is another reset tool that changes the margins, but not the sizes. There's a whole bunch of developers have a lot of different opinions of this kind of thing. And you will, as you make more projects, make your own preferences as to whether you want to use a reset or anything else like it. Cool. So we are going to apply, if we have a look in our HTML, the first element is the body. So we're going to apply our first styles to the body. So we're going to make a body selector and it's an element selector. So we just need to write the name of the element. And then we're going to do a, where did that go? We're going to do a space and our curly brackets. And inside that, we are going to set a font family. So we're going to say font family. And then we're going to set it to Arial. And Arial is, it's just an easier to read font. So generally on screens, on sort of computer displays, sans serif fonts are easier to read. And in print, serif fonts are easier to read. So when I'm doing web design, I tend to stick to sans serif fonts, but again, it's a preference. Whenever we set a font, we always want to set what we call a fallback font. So we're not just going to set it to Arial, we're going to also set Helvetica. And then as an ultimate fallback, sans serif. And what we're saying here is, I want this to display in Arial. If for some reason this user is on a computer that doesn't have Arial installed, then render it in Helvetica. If somehow this user is on a computer that doesn't have Arial or Helvetica installed, just use any sans serif font at this point. The likelihood is most people are going to have Arial and Helvetica installed. This is a holdover from the very old days of the web when back in the day, it used to be that Windows machines had Arial installed and Macs had Helvetica installed. So you would give the option of both. And then some people may have, deleted all of their fonts, and maybe you just want to choose any sans serif font. Do we know what a serif is? Does anybody want me to explain what a serif is? The feet. Yeah, exactly. So in a serifed font, we have those nice little curly bits at the bottom and curly bits at the top. The little tails, exactly. So that is a serif, and sans serif is French for without serif. So our sans serif fonts don't have the little curly tails and feet and things. So if we save that now and refresh in our browser, you see the font change. Anyone? Would we relink to the new style sheet? Absolutely, Christopher. Yes. Nice. I'm trying to catch you out, and I can't catch you out because you're all too clever. We need to link the new style sheet, and we are going to do so in our HTML. So we are going to say link rel equals style sheet. If I could type. And href equals style.css. Lovely. And there's an important thing to note here, especially if you're using a reset CSS. We always put our styles after our reset. And the reason for that is the C in CSS. So CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And when we talk about the cascade, what we're talking about is anything we write further down the page is going to overwrite the things that are higher up on the page. So the things that are going to render cascade down the page. So if I were to, for example, put a second body tag in here, body selector in here, sorry, and I set the font family to, let's just choose a random one from here. Let's say impact. This one is going to overwrite this one because it's further down the page. It is further down the cascade. And the cascade works through files as well. So everything in the reset CSS is going to affect the page, and then everything in our style sheet is going to affect the page. The cascade goes right the way through all of those files. So if we put the reset CSS after all of the styles that we've written, they're going to basically reset all the styles that we've written. So if you are using a reset, just be careful that you are putting the reset after, you're putting the reset before your style CSS. Okay, so now that we've done that, if we save and we open it up in the browser, we should hopefully see that we now have a sans serif font instead of a serif font. Awesome, awesome. So now we're going to start styling up the actual design that we made. So if we take a look at the design, do you remember this is what we wanted the header to look like? So I've designed it so it's going to be the full height of the window when the page first loads, and it's going to push all the rest of the content down beneath what we call in the web dev business, we call it the fold. So meaning that our viewers need to scroll to be able to see the rest of this content. I've just realized it's not sharing the tab. There we go. That's what I wanted to share. So the design of our header is going to be the full height of the page. And then we have the content that is inside of this header, the H1 and the link are going to be both vertically and horizontally centered within the header. And there's an old joke about web design that vertical centering in CSS was the most difficult thing in the entire of computer science. And you will hear this joke often in your travels, and it's so outdated now because we have so many tools in modern CSS that make vertical centering really easy. So now you can be super smug and be like, oh, you just don't know your CSS, because we're going to learn it right now. So we have our body with our font family of Arial, and now we are going to style up the header. And we're going to set a height for the header element to make it the height of the window. And the way that we do that is by setting a height, which is 100 VH. And a VH is a viewport. Oh, thank you, Colette. Is a viewport height unit. So 100 VH is 100% of the viewport height, which is how we're going to get that header to stretch to be the size of the whole browser. Then we're going to use something called Flexbox, which is how we're going to center the contents. So we're going to set, first of all, display flex on the header, which is saying I'm going to use Flexbox. And then flex has two different options. It can be flexed in a row or flexed in a column. And flex is what you use when you want items to either sit next to each other or sit one on top of the other. So either in a row or in a column. I hope you can see my hand gestures here. We want these two items to sit on top of each other. So we've got the H1 and we've got the anchor tag. So we are going to set them to be in a column. So we're going to set flex direction column. And then we want them to sit in the middle. So we have two options. We want to set it in the middle vertically and in the middle horizontally. So first of all, we are going to set justify content center, which is going to center it horizontally. So the way that you remember which one is which. So we have justify content center and we have align item center. The way that you remember each one, justify, do you remember when you were doing like Word document editing and you can do text align left, text align right, text align center, or text align justify, and the justify stretches the text to hit either side of the box. So that's how you remember that the justify content is what's going to change it horizontally, and align items is what's going to change it vertically. Or at least that's how I remember it. There's also a really excellent guide to Flexbox right here. I'm going to let me share the link with you all here, but also I'm going to open it up in my browser. So this is, again, Chris Coyer of CSS Tricks, absolutely excellent writer, has made this beautiful, oh my gosh, she's released a poster as well. I love that. This beautiful illustration of how Flexbox works. So as we can see, we can change the flex direction to either be a row or a column, or a reversed row or a reversed column. We can, so what he does is he goes through every single property that you can do with flexed items. So justify content, you can see we did justify content center here, which put everything in the middle, but we could have done all of these options. We also have a line item, so we chose a line item center. We could have chosen any of these options, and this whole website is just absolute gold. Like, really recommend having a look through this. And also, as somebody mentioned, Flexbox Froggy, which is this thing here, is a really cute game to help you learn Flexbox, where you can help a frog move around on lily pads. So we got to, we want to get the frog over onto this lily pad here. So we could say justify content flex n, maybe. There we go, and we got the frog onto the lily pad. Highly recommend Flexbox Froggy as a really cute way of learning how to use Flexbox. We will talk about Grid later, and there's also a game called CSS Grid Garden, which is for learning CSS Grid. This is also super cute. And it'll teach you how to make CSS grids, but that's jumping ahead of myself a little bit. I've lost my share. Let's jump back in here. Okay, thank you, Flexbox Froggy. We're going back into here. And okay, and then we are going to just add a bit of padding to the header so that the H1 and the anchor tag don't hit the edges of the screen if we're on a very small screen size. So I'm just going to catch up with y'all and type that in to my editor. So we had our header. We made it height 100 VH, display, flex, flex direction, column, align item center, the content center, and then importantly, that padding of 2, did I make it rem or m? I can't remember. 2 rem. Okay, awesome. So there's a whole bunch of things to talk about here. Let's open it up in the browser and take a look at what we've made. Cool. So we stunningly beautiful. We now have this thing here where our header is now 100% of the height of the browser window, and our H1 and our anchor tag are floating in the middle of that section. And our inspect tools here have some really useful tooling for trying your design out at different sizes. So not only can I drag this around here to change the window, but I also have this little tool up here. I hope you can see where my mouse is. There's a little picture of a laptop and a phone, a little icon with a laptop and a phone. So if I click on that, it gives me the ability to not only drag in the window this way, no, hello, but also drag it around this way. My mouse is definitely not very happy today, so apologies for weirdness. Cool. Oh, I've thought of one thing that we haven't done. Okay, so you notice how when I drag this in here to the side, the text gets really tiny. That is because our browser is doing something clever with the scaling, and it is assuming that we want this to view the same at all screen sizes, and we actually don't. We want this text to be the same size at mobile to desktop. So what we're going to do is we are going to actually add in some extra HTML. So let's just jump back into my editor. And I promise I will talk about padding. I'll talk about all the things that we just wrote, but we need to add in one extra bit of HTML in here, which is a meta viewport. Let me just find the correct syntax for this. So we are going to say meta viewport. Meta name equals viewport, sorry. And what we're saying here, oh, thank you, Colette. We're going to say content width equals device width. And initial scale is 1. And what this is going to do is stop the browser from doing that resizing. So our fonts won't get really tiny at mobile sizes. So what Colette has pasted there is exactly correct. So if you want to copy and paste that rather than typing it out yourself, feel free. I'm going to jump back now and share my browser window again. Which one is this one? So now there we go. So now that font size isn't reducing as I reduce the size of the screen, but you will notice as it gets smaller, it's not hitting the edges of the browser, and that is because we put that padding in there. So if I inspect my header here, you can see that orange space. Orange? I'm going colorblind. See that green space? The green is our padding, and we saw the orange earlier. The orange is our margin, and we will talk about that in a little bit as well. So everybody give me a thumbs up if you are following so far, if you have your centered header, which is full size, and your text is now not decreasing in size. Awesome. Please do, of course, give me a shout if there's anything that you're confused about so far, anything that you'd like me to go over. But let's talk about the difference between, in the style section, I see the button next to display flex. Aha, yes. So that is basically, Chrome has built in a whole load of tools to make this a lot easier for you. So I think somebody mentioned it earlier on. If you don't want to use Chris Coyer's beautiful illustrative design, you can also use this tool here. So you can see we could instead change this to be display row, flex direction row, or flex direction column. We can tell it whether we want it to wrap, we can tell it how we want it to be aligned. It's a nice visual tool that does your flexbox for you. super duper cool. Definitely use these tools. You can also, it's got a whole bunch of tools in here. So we could, for example, change we could change the units. We can change the value. So we could make this 10 VH instead, and then it's only a tenth of the viewport height. We can do all kinds of things in here. We can change this to be 20 rem of padding. Bit much, maybe. Roger, I'm not sure what you're asking. To your question there, could you expand a little bit? Okay. I did not follow the styling of the header. Okay. So the styling of the header that you want so far is everything that you can see in here. So make sure that you add that into your CSS file. Karen has very rightly said it doesn't change the if you're messing around with things and you decide, for example, that you want this to be 50 VH instead of 100, make sure that you then transfer that over into your CSS file. There are also extensions that you can install that will edit your CSS file as you edit in the browser, but I actually don't recommend doing that. You can get yourself into a mess that way. Just make sure that you remember to copy across what you've done. Cool. Okay, so we were going to talk about what padding is and what margin is. And the difference between margin and padding can be a little confusing. And so there's a whole definition of what these two are, and it's called the box model, and it's used to describe how spacing works in CSS. And I personally like to illustrate the box model like an art gallery, like a wall in an art gallery. Oh yeah, I've got those two links there. So imagine, if you will, a beautiful art gallery with paintings on the wall. And each painting has a frame, so we can see the frame here. And each painting has a mount. So the mount is this white space here. And then the painting itself. And the painting itself is your content. So it could be a paragraph, it could be an H1, it could be a block quote, any element really, but the painting itself is your content. Then the padding is the white bit. So the painting is your content, the padding is the white bit, the frame itself is your border, so we can add a border to our elements as well. And then the margin is the space between each of the elements. So the way that we tend to think of it is we think of padding as being inside and margin as being outside. We've not looked at border yet, but we will do that when we put the box around our little read more buttons. So that is your box model, and you can actually see it. It's also illustrated in your dev tools. So if we jump back into the portfolio here and we scroll down to the bottom, we can see here that we have, this is our element, this is our padding, we don't have any border, and we don't have any margin. So there's a nice little box model diagram in your inspect tools. I'm sorry, because we're about to do exactly that. So you might notice that, and I promise I will make this nice and easy for you. You might notice that this green that you're seeing here, so this padding, there's 2 EMs of padding that we gave, we're only seeing it in the inspector on the left-hand side and on the top. Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph. Hopefully you'll be able to see the recording and catch up. So yeah, we can see that the green is only along the top and on the left-hand side. And the reason that that is happening, as I mentioned, the border is on the padding, sorry, is on the inside of the element. And we've put 2 M's of padding onto a thing that is 100% to the width of the page. So what has happened is it's pushed all of the content across by 2 M's, 2 rems even, and now the content is sort of falling off the edge of the page. It's rendering outside of the space of the window of the browser. So Joseph, all of the lessons are being recorded, so you should be able to catch up hopefully with the recorded videos. I'm really sorry you got disconnected. The reason why this is happening is, as somebody has mentioned already who was at Bedros has mentioned, we have something called the content box and the border box. And have I got a nice visualization of this? I do not, but there is a really nice visualization of this online. So let's Google for border box FTW. You can see I use this very regularly. So Paul Irish, this awesome guy here, has designed a fix for us. So by default, and I will never know, no one will ever know why the CSS specifications team decided on this. By default, they decided that padding would be additive. So if I had a, let's think of an example. If I had an element on the page that was 20 pixels wide and I gave it 10 pixels of padding, you might expect that that 10 pixels of padding would take up the whole space of the element because the element is 20 pixels wide. In fact, let's give a better example. Let's say I have an element that is 100 pixels wide. So I'm going to just jump into my editor here and give you something to look at. So let's just make a visual example. So let's say I have a paragraph that is width 100 pixels. And I applied a padding of 10 pixels to that. You might very sensibly assume that that is going to take up 100 pixels of width on the page, and there will be 10 pixels of padding inside of that. However, what actually happens here is this element ends up being 120 pixels wide because the padding is additive. The padding pushes out the edges of the box, which can cause a lot of problems. Imagine you're aligning 3 elements next to each other and you have a box that's 300 pixels wide. You have 3 items that are 100 pixels that you need to fit into it, and you give them each a padding of 10 pixels. Suddenly, they're not going to fit into that space. But do not worry, help is at hand with this beautiful piece of CSS that Paul Irish gave us. So let's just jump back into there. So by default, our CSS is set to content box. Content box means the padding is additive. We can set it to box sizing border box instead, and that fixes all of our problems. It makes all of the content all of the padding sit inside the width rather than pushing the width out. So what we're going to do is you're all going to go to this place here. You're all going to copy this bit of CSS here, and you're going to paste it into the bottom of your reset CSS file. And this is he's got a nice illustration here of what the problem is. So let's jump back into our editor. We're going to open up our reset CSS, and we're just going to paste that into the bottom of there. And what this is doing here is it's saying apply box sizing border box to the HTML element. And then this star selector is a way of saying every single element after that is going to inherit from the containing element, and the containing element is border box. So we're setting border box on everything. So now if we save that and refresh in our browser, you should hopefully see that your padding is now sat inside the space. So I'm going to jump back into my editor. Da-da-da-da. Refresh. What have I done wrong? Oh, come on. Paul Irish, don't let me down. Do I need to set a width on it? Oh, okay. I think it was just a glitch in my browser. It is working. So yes, now you can see all edges of the margin, the padding, sorry, are all inside of our browser window, which is what we want. And we don't have to ever think about content box ever again, because that's going to just apply for every single element. It feels like a lot, and I'm sorry, it's one of those frustrating things that you just have to learn quite early on in your web dev career. And then once you learn it, you'll start applying that border box fix to everything, and then you'll never think about it again. So there's other things that we need to talk about here. We've been swapping around different CSS units and not really mentioning what any of them are. So if we, oh yeah, so that's my beautiful box model. Let's talk about CSS units. CSS has a whole load of different ways of expressing length and width, and we've seen one already. So we saw our 100 VH, and we've seen our padding of 2 rems. And we can use these different units when we're expressing font sizes, margin sizes, padding sizes, width, heights, all kinds of different properties. And these are the ones, I'm going to list out the ones that you're most likely to see, and they can be split into 2 different types. We have, firstly, absolute values. So absolute units. Makes me laugh every time. We have pixels and points. And these are measured exactly for a certain zoom level of your browser. So pixels are exactly 1/96th of an inch, and points are exactly 1/72th of an inch. And these are, they're useful for certain things. If you want the page to render an exact way, but they can start to cause issues if the user zooms in or out, or if the user has set a different font size to the standard font size. The standard font size for most browsers being 16 pixels. So the other units, which are the ones that I'm going to recommend you use more often, are your relative units. And these are a bit more friendly to our users with accessibility needs. So for example, someone who has impaired vision might have set their default font size to a larger font size, and we want all the other fonts on the page to be relative to this new default font size that they've set. So we have M's, which are relative to the basic font size. And M is so called because it's the size of the widest letter in the alphabet, which is a capital letter M. And it takes that size and then uses that to be the size. So 12 M's would be 12 capital letter M's in width. Rems are relative to the font size of the root element. So M's are the size of the element that you're setting. So for example, say you've made a paragraph and you set the font size to be 16 pixels, 1 M would be 16, 2 M's would be 32. I could have chosen an easier number here, and so on. Rems are relative to the font size of the root element. So in most cases, this is going to be the font size of the body or the HTML. The viewport height we've already seen is 1% of the viewport height. The viewport width is 1% of the width of the viewport. And a percentage is relative to the parent element, as it says here. So 50% of the parent element would be 50% of the width of the parent element, 25%, and so on. We know how percentages work. There is actually some new units that have just come out, which I haven't actually updated onto these slides, for viewport height and viewport width. I'm going to leave them out for now because they're not supported across every browser. But if you want to look them up, I think it's called default viewport height. Yes, so if you want to look them up, default viewport height and default viewport width, and then we've also got max viewport height and max viewport width. They're kind of interesting. Look them up in your own time if you want to. I'm going to disagree with Bedros here. Definitely do touch default viewport height. It's very helpful if you are making things for phones, because the phone renders in a toolbar sometimes, which will cause a scroll in your website. But yes, it's not going to affect us today, so we're not going to look at it today. But yes, these are the units that we are going to be using most frequently. So let's get back to our styling. The next thing we're going to style up is the H1. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of space between the H1 and the link. What do we use to add space between two items? It's not padding, it's the other one. Margin, thank you. Awesome. So margin is the space between things. Padding is the space inside of things. So we are going to, oh, please don't apologize. I'm glad you jumped in. So we're going to add some margin to the bottom of the H1. And then we also want to increase the font size of the H1. And we're going to use our relative units here. So we're going to make it 5 VW. What that's going to do is scale the text with the viewport width. And then we're going to set the font weight to bold, and we're going to give it a line height of 1.4 EM, because I think it looks nicer when you have a bit more space between lines of text. And I think that 1.4 EM is 1.4M, I think it's a visually attractive amount of space. Again, this is something that you can choose for yourselves. 1.4M is saying 1.4 times the size of the font size of this element. So it would be 1.4 times 5 VW. So let's put all of that into, I'll just leave that up there for those of you who are typing. I'm going to also type it in myself. Oh, and Puff is here to say hello. The recording will be available, so Patty will share out the link, I believe, to everybody who attended, and she'll be tweeting it out. If you're using VH for the height, is it recommended to use VW for the font size? Yes, so I tend to use VW for font sizes because if you think about the devices that people are using, I want the font size to change with the width of their device rather than with the height of their device, because I want, for example, the font to be smaller on a mobile than it is on a tablet, than it is on a laptop, than it is on a desktop. So I want the font size to change with the width rather than the height. Yeah, that's why I'm using VW here. And we can actually see that in action if we jump over to here. So you can see I've set the font size to 5 VW, and you can see it changing as my screen gets smaller and increasing as my screen gets bigger. So that's super cool. If you want to, again, we're not going to go into it here, but if you want to, you can take a look at something called Clamp, which is used to set a maximum and minimum font size. So what you can do, in fact, I say we're not going to do it here. Why don't we just do it here? I'm going to jump into my editor. This is so in our font size, we can do something called Clamp. And then we set a minimum and a maximum. So the minimum I want it to go down to is 2 rem, 5 VW. The maximum I want it to go up to is like, that's a sensible maximum, maybe 40 rem. Try that out, see what that looks like. Yeah, I mean, that's still getting pretty big at my giant browser size. So maybe 40 rem is too much. Maybe we go maximum 30 rem. That's still huge. 20. When do you use rem and when do you use VW? Okay, good question. So rem won't change with the browser size. So if I was to set this to 10 rem, let's say, okay, that's actually huge. 5 rem, and I jump into my browser. So it's set to 5 rem. You will see it's not actually changing with the browser width at all, because rem is relative to the size of the font set on the document, but not relative to the width of the document. So if I want the font to change relative to the width of the document, then I would use VW. If I want this font to always stay the same size, then I would use rem. So let's just change that back now to what was it that I had before, 5BW. Now you can see it changing with the size of the browser. So those are the different choices. I wanted to change with the width of the browser. So I'm going to leave my clamp on and I'm going to give it a maximum of 6 rem as the maximum font size. And now, so what I've done, you can see my clamp here, minimum 2 rem, 5 VW is what it's going to change between, and a maximum of 6 rem. So if I bring it down, it's going to get to a point where it hits 2 rem, and then it's not going to get smaller than that. And it's going to start to wrap. And it's going to get huge. And on my giant monitor, let's see if we can stretch this out. Yeah, there we go. So we can see it got up to a certain size and then it stopped getting any bigger. And then it gets down to a certain size and stops getting any smaller. Clamp is super cool. But again, the clamp is getting a bit advanced for beginner CSS. So if you don't want to think about clamp, don't worry about it too much. It's just a super cool thing to look at. I always get a bit ahead of myself in these classes. I get excited and I want to show you everything. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to style up that link. So we've styled up our H1. That looks super cool. We're going to style up the link. And let's go back one. So we have multiple links on the page. And up until now, we've been using something called an element selector. So we've been applying the styles directly onto the element. Now we want a way to be able to differentiate between different elements on the page. I want to style my link here to have that nice little red box around it. But I don't want every link on the page to have that red box around it. I've got some other links further down that I want to look different. So I need a way to differentiate between this link and other links on the page. And the way that we do that is with something called a class attribute. And it looks like this. What we're going to do is we're going to add in this class attribute into our HTML, into the anchor tag, and then we're going to use that as a selector instead of the anchor tag selector. So let's jump into our editor. How are we doing for time? Oh, we got loads of time. Brilliant. Jump back into our editor, jump back into our HTML, and on this anchor tag here, we are going to add in class equals, and we're going to call it button. Generally, you want to make your class names describe what it is that you're styling, so that it's obvious when you look at the CSS what it is that it's applying to. As much as possible, you want the class names not to describe what it looks like. So I wouldn't call this red box, for example, because my designer may well come along at some point in the future and say, we're doing a complete brand rechange. Our new brand color is blue, and now I have a red box that has a styling of blue on it, and none of that makes sense. So we're going to call it button because that sort of describes what it is. It kind of looks like a button. And then we are going to use what is called a class selector to apply styles to that button class. And the class selector looks like this. It is just a little dot. It's the period character, the full stop. And then the class name. So in this case, it is button. And then our styling is going to look exactly the same. So the styling that we are going to apply to our button, we first of all want to put that nice border on it. So we're going to give it a border of 1 pixel solid red. And we don't want that border to touch the text. So what do we do? What do we use to put space between the content and the border? Padding, exactly. Love it. So we're going to give it a padding of 1 rem, a border of 1 pixel solid red. I'm going to give it a font weight of bold because I think it looks nice. We're going to we want to get rid of the underline on the link because I think that looks ugly. So we're going to give it text decoration none, which gets rid of that underline. And we want to change the color of the text to red as well. Nope. And of course, you don't have to choose red. You can choose any color that you like. And now if we jump back into our browser, we should see our beautiful button here. So that looks super cool. We could also, of course, add some styles too. So we put that nice little span tag in there. We could add some styles to that. So we could add a class to that span tag, and then we could add a color of red onto there as well. So why don't we do that? We're going to call this, let's call it heading highlight maybe. Tell me if this is getting too small. And make a selector. I'm going to put it above because it comes before the anchor tag. We're going to give it a select our heading highlight. And we're going to give it a color of red. So everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat if you now have a nice colored button with a border and you have a nice colored span. And of course, ask any questions. Awesome, awesome. Okay. So the programmers amongst you might start noticing something that's happening here. With CSS, especially with colors and spacing and sizes, we might find that we start using the same things multiple times. So you can see here, we've got the color red in here multiple times. And we might want to set a standard spacing between our elements, for example, of maybe 2 rems. And anytime we see things like this, our brain should go, oh, maybe that could be a variable. Maybe this is something that I might want to change at some point in the future. And when I change it, I want to change it everywhere. So if I set it as a variable, I only need to set it once and then it'll change everywhere. And the way that we write variables with CSS is we use something called root, which looks like this. So you're going to go right to the top of your CSS file before the body, and you're going to type in a colon and the word root. And then you're going to put in your curly brackets like we did before. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable name. And CSS convention has decreed that variables in CSS start with a double dash. Now, don't ask me why that was decided. I think it's quite ugly, but it is what it is. So we're starting the name with a double dash, and we're going to call ours, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it, okay, primary. Because this is the primary color of our design. And for me, I've made it red. You can make it obviously whichever color you would like it to be. So our primary is going to be set to red. And now what we can do is we can use that variable in our CSS. So we're going to replace everywhere we see the color red, we're going to use that variable instead. And the way that we use it is with this. So we're going to have var and a parenthesis and then minus minus primary. We're going to copy that out for that and for that. And now what you can do, so you can have a play around with this yourself. If you want to change the color of your website, say you decided that your designers come in one day and said, no, red is out and blue is in. We could make it a really beautiful blue color instead. This is my personal favorite, 0595 CD is a really nice little turquoise color. So now we make that turquoise and all of those colors are going to change to turquoise. Yes, color. I love CSS variables. They're so cool. And we're going to have some real fun doing some cool things with our variables here. So now that how much time have we got? We've got half an hour. Okay, cool. Now that our header is styled up, it's time to move on to the next element in our HTML, which is our main. So we're going to start styling up our main element. But if we go back to the design, if we think about the design, because I don't have the design open right now, the main doesn't actually need any styling. It's just a box which is holding the content of the site. So the next thing we're actually going to look at styling is our about section. And we have multiple sections in our HTML. So we know already that we have this about section, we have a project section, we have a contact section. And we want to apply a background color to the about section. But we don't want to apply that to every section. So we're going to give this section a class. So if we jump back into our HTML, we are going to apply a class and we're going to call it about. And then in our CSS, we are going to make a selector for our about section. And we're going to start styling it. So first of all, we want to make sure that in fact, let's jump back into my slides since I have beautiful slides for this. So first of all, at the moment, the text and the image are both hitting the edge of the page, which we don't want to happen. So we want to put some space between the text and the edge of the page. So we're going to give it some padding. I'm just going to share the whole window so I can swap between tabs easily. Okay. Cool. So we're going to give it some padding. Then we are going to set the background color to be our primary color, and we're going to set the text color, which is just color, confusingly, to be white. So I'm going to type all of that into my editor. Then after our about, we have the H2, which we're going to style. Because we've got multiple H2s down the page, I like to keep my heading styles all together in my CSS. So I'm actually going to put my H2 styling directly underneath my H1 styling. And we are going to, what are we going to do? We are going to give it some space between it and the image. We're going to give it a text align of center. We're going to increase the font size. We're going to make it font weight bold. And we're going to make it text transform uppercase, which should make Bedros happy. The text transform uppercase. The reason why we use text transform uppercase rather than typing it out in uppercase is it's an accessibility reason again. So screen readers will read out text in uppercase differently to how they read out text that's not in uppercase. So it's just a better idea to do your text transform in uppercase rather than type out the whole heading in uppercase. And again, your designer may come back in the future and say, uppercase is out, we're changing all of that. And it just means you don't have to retype out all of your copy. Exactly. Some screens, especially older screen readers, will read out every letter as if they're spelling it out when it's in uppercase. It's just a bad idea. So if you want your text to be in uppercase, put text transform uppercase into your CSS rather than typing it out. Cool. Okay. So you might notice now in our HTML, in our CSS, sorry, we've got another repeated value. So we've got in the about section, we've got a padding of 4 rem. And in our H2, we've got a margin bottom of 4 rem. So 4 rem might start to become a spacing that we use frequently in this particular design. So we're going to create a variable for it. So if we jump back into our CSS and we scroll to the top, let's see, have I got, okay, I haven't actually got a visual of us creating that spacing element. So let's jump back into the editor. And in our root up at the top here, we're going to create a new variable called spacing. And we are going to set spacing to be 4 rem. And then where we've used 4 rem, we are going to change that to be var spacing. and far spacing. Cool. Now, there's something we haven't spoken about yet, and that is the way that we're doing padding here. You might notice, where did we do it? On the H2 and on the H1, we've set margin bottom. And in other places, we've just set margin or we've just set padding. So what's the difference between margin bottom and padding bottom and margin and padding? And this is going to require me to, let me see if there's, I might have to open up Paint for you right now. Are you ready for my stunning illustration attempts? I don't know if you can hear my cat crying in the background. Okay, so we have our element. Gosh, it's been a long time since I opened Paint. Here is my element. This is a paragraph. And I'm going to apply a margin to it, which, as we know, is the spacing outside. So I could apply a margin of 10 pixels. Oh my goodness, this is not the tool for the job. I could apply a margin of 10 pixels. And what is happening when I apply margin 10 pixels? My mouse is really not very happy today. It keeps unclicking whenever I click. So there we go. If I apply a margin of 10 pixels, what it's actually doing is it's applying 10 pixels to the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. It's a shorthand way of writing it. What it's actually writing, when you write margin 10 pixels, what you're actually writing is margin 10 pixels. Oh, come on, mouse. What you're actually writing is margin 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels. And by just writing it once, it's a shorthand. Oh gosh, you can't even see that, can you? Can you see that? Just okay. Let's zoom in. Okay, awesome. So you're setting margin top 10 pixels, margin right 10 pixels, margin bottom 10 pixels, margin left 10 pixels. It goes around like a clock. And there are a few different shorthand things that you can do. So you could write margin, you 10 pixels, 10 pixels. And what that would do is apply 10 pixels to the top and bottom and 10 pixels to the left and right. In fact, let's make this a bit easier to understand. 10 pixels to the top and bottom, 20 pixels to the left and right. So that's another shorthand that you can use. So at the moment, we've seen one shorthand, which is just one value. A shorthand with two values will apply top and bottom together and left and right together. There is also a shorthand, which is margin. And this applies to padding as well. Oh, come on. I apologize for my mouse situation. Another shorthand, which is margin. Ten pixels, 20 pixels, 30 pixels, for example, which would add 10 pixels on the top 20 pixels on the left and right and 30 pixels on the bottom. And so when we're writing something like margin bottom, 10 pixels, what we're saying is only apply the margin to the bottom. And we could write margin left, we could write margin right, we could write margin top. And this applies exactly the same way with padding. So usually we'll just write one value in there, and it's a shorthand way of saying put the same margin all the way around this element. So that's just a little detour that we haven't looked into. And if we want to specify, we would say margin bottom, margin right, margin left, etc. Okay. I'm sorry, you're going to keep falling into these little detours because my brain goes all over the place. Let's jump back in to our actually styling our website. How much time have we got? Okay. We want to style up the image. So at the moment, cool. So we've got our beautiful header. We've got our About Me section, which has an image and has some text in it. We want mobile sizes. We want the image to sit in the middle, and we want the text to sit beneath it, something like this. So we're going to style those up first. Let's forget about the about container for now. We're going to style up the image, and we're going to style up the paragraph. So we're going to give the image that is in our about a class of about image, and then we're going to style up the paragraph. So I'm going to jump back into our editor. And as I said, we're going to give this a class of about image. So that's going on the image itself. And then we're going to give this a maximum width of 350 pixels. And then we're going to style up the paragraph. And I'm going to set the font size to be 1 rem. And I am going to set the font size to be 1 rem. And I'm going to set that line height to be 1.4 again, because I think it looks nice. And I'm going to give us also a margin bottom of 1 1M. So it's going to be the same size as the font that I've set. And on my about image, I'm going to give it also a margin bottom of 1 rem, so that we have a bit of space between the image and the text that comes after it. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my favorite tricks. Let's see if this works. We are going In fact, let's not do that today. We'll do that on Wednesday. Sorry, my brain is running ahead of myself. Because the next thing that we need to talk about on Wednesday is responsive web design. You heard giggling noises. I think that might just have been my cat. She is definitely trying to tell me that it's dinner time. Oh, you heard googling noises. That's what you're saying. No, what I was actually doing was trying out something, but I've just realized if we go down that route, we're going to start a whole, we're going to open a whole new can of worms, which I think we should save for when we're fresh on Wednesday. Because the next thing that we need to talk about is responsive web design. So let's jump into my slides. So what we've got here is this beautiful website so far, which has our header, we've got our About Me section, and we haven't styled up anything else yet. But what we would like to happen ideally is once the text starts to get super wide, we want it to sit next to this image rather than sitting below this image. So this kind of looks nice at yeah, you are entirely right. 1.4 for line height could indeed be a variable. That would be a nice way to go. Well spotted. If you would like to make a variable, please do. We're going to start having a look at responsive web design on Wednesday, where we're going to make this layout change at different browser sizes. But I think we will leave it till Wednesday because I don't know about you, but my brain is feeling very warm right now, and I feel like we have done quite a lot of stuff already. Do have a play around at this design. As Roger has pointed out, there are more variables that we could create here for sure. Have a go with trying out different sizings, different colors, different fonts, all kinds of interesting things. But I think we will leave it there for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. As always, it's so nice to have you all interacting with me. Like, it makes such a difference as a teacher, having people who ask questions rather than just sitting there silently. Yeah, if anybody has any questions or if you've got anything that you would like us to debug together, now is your time to give us a shout. And I will, of course, share the slides out with you. The slides have spoilers for what is coming up on Wednesday. So read ahead if you want to. Let me get you that slide link. There you go. But yeah, thank you so much. And I will see you all the same time on Wednesday. Oh, don't forget to, before you all jump away, let's do our git commit. Thank you. Exactly. Let's open up our, where's my terminal? New terminal. There we go. Git status. What have we done? We've added a bunch of files. Git add dot git commit -m added styles. Git push origin main. Just expand that out for you so you can see all of the commands. So we did git add, git commit, git push. Get those green squares and also don't lose your work. Which slide did we get up to? We got up to slide number 28. I was just talking and I was on mute. It's amazing. We got up to slide number 28. Was it the slide deck for last week's that you were looking for, Roger? Let me get that for you. This was last week's slides. Everything written in CSS can actually be specified as HTML tags, but we do it in CSS for the sake of clarity. I'm not sure I quite understand the question you're asking. So the rules for what should be HTML and what should be CSS are all of your content goes in the HTML. So your text, your images, all of that should be written in HTML. And we use semantic markup. So we use the correct elements to make sure that our screen readers can understand what the layout of the page is going to be. We then put the styling, so what it's going to look like, into the CSS. So your HTML should always be the content, the CSS should always be what it looks like. Does that make sense? Cool. Yes, I haven't even talked about inline styles because we don't do inline styles. So we won't be learning them. Inline styles are when you write your CSS into your HTML. We don't do that because styles are not content, and the only thing that goes into our HTML is content. Don't ask me my feelings on React. Okie dokie, everybody. If we do not have any more questions, I'm going to call it here. So what we're going to do is on Wednesday, we are going to continue styling, and hopefully we'll finish off the styling section. And then next Monday, we're going to start learning some JavaScript.
Thank you, Jo, for presenting for us.
That's my pleasure.
Also remember, everyone, you can catch up on previous sessions and future sessions on the YouTube. I'll send the link. Thanks, Jo.
Yay. Hi, everyone on Discord. I'm sorry I can't chat with you. I hope you're all having a good time too. Join the Discord. Somebody give me a link to the Discord. I don't even know where the Discord is.